Thanks, and thanks, Linda, for that good summary. I might stand up too, only because then I can see all. Well, thanks for the invitation too, and that terrific opening summary. I too acknowledge this is Gadigal land and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. The institution I'm a part of, all of our communities, is on stolen land. I believe delivering self-determination and justice to First Nations peoples should be front and centre of all of our political work and indeed our community work. We are such a long way from that. And so I acknowledge this is Aboriginal land at the outset. The inquiry. So I'm the chair of the inquiry. I'm not speaking on behalf of the inquiry because the inquiry hasn't yet finalised its report. So any observations I give you is just in that capacity as a Greens MP and also as of the chair of the inquiry. And of course, John's on the inquiry as well. And it's been a fairly interesting time, I think that's fair to say. Why did we set up the inquiry? Well, we set up the inquiry. It's a parliamentary inquiry. It has a non-government majority. It's established through the upper house. And we set it up because it's pretty clear that community faith in the building industry, in construction standards, in the security of our homes, has pretty much collapsed. And it's collapsed for a good reason. It's because we've gone through about 3 decades now of experimenting with deregulation and privatisation. And that has led to a dramatic collapse in actual construction standards. It's led to a lack of rigour in oversight in building design, and it's led to a real lottery, particularly if you are purchasing an apartment in a multi-level residential tower. It's a real lottery as to whether or not you're getting what you paid for, or whether or not you're going to have to face maybe 10, maybe 20, maybe a couple $100,000 worth of bills in to repair the defects. And if you think that I'm exaggerating with a couple of $100,000, they're the kind of bills that are being faced by owners of the Mascot Tower or owners of the Opal Tower. You know, cripplingly large bills to fix building defects. And those properties are just the tip of the iceberg. And Isabel gave an indication of one of the reasons why we don't know the full extent. One of the reasons we don't know the full extent of the building standards crisis is because there are many strata corporations, many large buildings that have very significant defects, but they're not willing to come forward and publicly talk about it because, bang, that whacks your property values. And it's a collective hit that the owners of the property take. And you can see how that tension means that in many places we have a kind of conspiracy of silence about the extent of the problem. But I know my office has received dozens and dozens and dozens of individual inquiries and concerns raised from individual property owners. I'm sure it's the same for different councils and parliamentary offices. Can I also say, before I get into the sort of depths of the mess that is the New South Wales construction industry, that local government New South Wales under Linda's leadership has been a really solid ally in trying to fix this up. And I do commend the work of Linda in particular. I haven't always admired the leadership of local government in New South Wales, but I think Linda's doing a terrific job, and she's actually been there advocating for some really sensible solutions, and that's good to see local government coming on board and having good leadership. So, where did it all go wrong? Well, you heard Isabel talk about a couple of recent reports. The Shergold-Weir report, which was delivered last year, and it was actually delivered to the federal federal collection of building ministers, the kind of COAG process, if you can imagine that. But before that, we had the Lambert report. And indeed, Lambert's been one of these witnesses who has been terrific in coming to the committee. He's a former head of the New South Wales Treasury, he knows how government works, and he did a really comprehensive review, 2015, delivered in 2016, delivered about 150 recommendations, which the government immediately, because they're such great conservationists, put in the recycling bin and actually they basically dropped it like a gun because it was going to require re-regulation. It was going to require significant change to this push of deregulation. And Lambert said that he'd last tallied up 18 reports since this mess of deregulation was started in the last 20 years, 18 significant reports that have been delivered to the government talking about the need for fundamental reform. And almost none of those recommendations have been seriously adopted. Almost none of them. One of the key sort of points to remember in the past, if you're thinking about when do I buy a multi-level apartment building, think about 1998, because 1998 was when the then Labor government decided to privatise building certification. And so that's a key point in terms of building standards. It isn't the only thing. There are a number of steps that were taken before that. But 1998 was where this sort of love of large-scale deregulation and privatisation really got a kick along. The certification, which was previously done by councils, public officers, not perfect by any means, but at least they were responsible to a large public authority, they had management checks and balances, and they didn't have a conflict of interest. Instead, the state government decided, and it went through the parliament, the state government decided that they would privatise certification and allow developers to choose their own certifiers to sign off on the compliance with the development approval and the compliance with the building standards. It'd be like, you know, having deciding you're going to go for a drive to Newcastle and being allowed to choose your own traffic police and contract for your own traffic police. You know, there's such an obvious conflict of interest in allowing developers to choose their own private certifiers. But the industry pushed for it. They thought it would be cheaper. They thought it would be quicker. They thought it'd get rid of red tape. And we've now had 2 decades of experiments with private certification, and it's been a disaster. There have been about 7 major efforts to actually reform the way private certification works. Well, I say major, 7 legislative efforts to try and reform it. Each one of them has failed because none of them get rid of that fundamental conflict between the developer choosing, paying for, and then often having a long-standing relationship with a single private certifier. And if you're dependent upon a developer for your next meal ticket and for a significant part of your business, the likelihood that you're going to be calling out the developer for poor building design or poor building quality is pretty low. Now, there are some great private certifiers, very ethical, very capable, but there are a bunch of rogues in the industry that are deeply unethical and have that fundamental conflict of interest. And we don't legislate or create rules for angels. We create rules, we're meant to create rules for like ordinary human beings who are subject to the pressures of conflicts of interest. So private certification is a disaster, but it's a long way from the only problem in the industry. In 2002, there was another report delivered in the New South Wales Parliament. Joint Select Committee, big brouhaha, was the Campbell Report. And the 2002 Campbell Report said one of the key problems of the construction industry is not only has there been the privatisation of certification, and they pointed out that was a problem, they said it needed to be fixed, and they came up with a couple of recommendations which weren't implemented, and even if implemented wouldn't have fixed it. But they said more fundamentally, there's a mess of oversight. Some of it's oversighted by fair trading, some of it's oversighted by Treasury, some of it's oversighted by local councils, some of it's oversighted by the planning department. It's a mess, and nobody actually has responsibility for buildings and building standards. And they said, why don't we create a building commission? In fact, that was their first core recommendation, to pull all together that mess of regulatory, multiple regulators, put it all under a single body, give somebody responsibility, and get together the critical mass of knowledge so as you can regulate. What did the government do? It just ignored that recommendation. And indeed, following on the Campbell Report, the key reform that the state government delivered immediately following the Campbell Report, because they could see a problem with the lack of building standards. The lack of building standards were producing a whole lot of defect claims. All of those defect claims was making it really expensive to get insurance to ensure the building quality of multi-level residential buildings in particular. There was a crisis in the insurance market created by the lack of building quality. What did the state government do? It removed the need to have home warranty insurance for multi-level building development. Anything above 3 stories no longer had to have statutory warranties. It's kind of madness to the extreme. I will now wrap it up. So going from 2003, there are a series of stops and starts. The insurance scheme continued to collapse, even for the smaller buildings. About 2 years ago, they reformed the insurance again because the insurance market was collapsing because of the cost of defects. And they, instead of fixing building qualities, what did they do? They reduced the insurance coverage for the rump of buildings that are covered. Even having done that, that statutory insurance scheme is now in the red, some $650 million, paid for by us because we subsidise collectively that insurance scheme for dodgy buildings. And when you look at the key recommendations of all of these different bodies, they're saying the same thing. We need to re-regulate and we need to enforce standards. And we need to re-regulate and enforce standards in how buildings are designed, because largely after the DA is approved, it's a private process between not just even the developer normally sells and gets a builder to construct. The builder constructs it and then steps away. And that builder gets a bunch of engineers and draftsmen in to actually design a building with no oversight. There's no oversight in that design process. Almost none of those people are forced to have either certification, licensing or insurance who design the building. That is clearly a problem. Secondly, the people who build the building are largely unlicensed, uninsured and unregulated. And the private certifier at the end of the day collects a bunch of certificates from the different trades, from the waterproofer, from the fire protection system, from the engineers, from the like, a bunch of certificates from people who are uninsured, unlicensed and unregulated. Having collected all those certificates, the private certifier signs off a final certificate that says this building is fit for purpose and fit for occupation and it complies with the building code. They're not worth the paper they're written on. And at the end of the day, the private certifier is being whacked because it's the only one who's insured. But until we fix that chain underneath it, for both design and construction, we're going to continue to have the disaster. Thanks very much.